Okay, Linda, over to you.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Right. Share screen, yes. Huh? And do I press share?
Yes, just carry on.
Okay, fine.
There
Can
you
you
go.
all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. That's good. Right. Well, thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to see so many faces. I recognise a few, but perhaps not all of you. I was asked to come and talk about my life as an artist and as an illustrator this afternoon. And really, I suppose the story starts way back in the mid-60s when I went to a little art school down on the south coast of England to study fine art, which is what I did for about 2.5 years. But I have always had a strong interest in things that actually the art school weren't very happy about me being interested in. In other words, I was very fond of drawing animals. I wasn't so keen on doing life drawing, although I did a lot of it. And I just began to feel increasingly uncomfortable after about 2 years that maybe fine art wasn't quite the right place to be. Although I enjoyed painting, and I always have. So I went to talk to my principal, and he said, why don't you do an illustration course? Which I did for the next 2 to 3 years. So my career has been split really in being an illustrator, which I was for 35 years. But I've always taught painting.
Yes, thank you very much.
I've always enjoyed both sides of it, really. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about and show you some pictures about how I actually started as an illustrator. So the first picture, I hope, is coming up.
Linda,
Yeah.
you need to go to slideshow.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, I do. Of course I do. Thanks, Ted.
Okay.
Yeah.
From the beginning. That's
Yeah,
it.
got it. Got it. Sorry, folks.
It's all right.
I'm not a technical person, really. You'll see I've got some strange letters after my name. That means I'm a member of the Society of Industrial Artists and Designers, which was originally started by people like Paul Nash. And it's for people who work in industry as well as just as painters. So the first picture is this. Now, I got my first break. It's very, very difficult to actually get into publishing as an illustrator because there's a sort of catch-22, which is you come out of art school and you have a lovely portfolio of stuff and you go and see a publisher and they say, have you had anything published? And you say, well, no, I've just come out of art school. And they say, well, we'll let you know when we might have something, but we'll contact you. And of course they don't. It's very important if you're an illustrator that the publisher can trust what you do. You can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't keep to a deadline, if your work doesn't print very well, for whatever reason, maybe the technique that you're using, the publisher will not be able to use you. And a deadline is the most important part of your life as an illustrator, because when you are illustrating, you are really just somebody in a chain of other people who are actually producing a book. And books, when the publisher publishes a book, they have an appointment with the illustrator has the deadline. The work then goes to a retail house, photographed. That's to date. So is the printer, so is the binder and the finisher. And so everything really depends on deadlines always. they need to kind of break into it. And the way I got in was an enormous stroke of luck. You'll have heard of Oliver Postgate and Peter Firmin, who did Bagpuss and the Clangers. And they also did something called Pogleswood. And Peter Firmin, I was lucky enough to meet, and he was actually looking for an illustrator to help him on his Christmas annuals. He used to publish Pogleswood annual every year, and I mean there were Bagpuss and Clangers ones. But this was the very first picture that I did for the Pogleswood annual. And those of you who remember Pogleswood will see the little characters at the bottom. And I made an horrific mistake. If you're sharp enough to see, the poor old horse is having its horseshoe put on backwards.
Oh
Which nobody actually spotted. That was done in gouache, using ink and gouache. So you have to be very careful if you are doing an illustration that when it ends up in print, it's got to be accurate. But actually, I got away with it. Nobody spotted it. However, on the next one, once I'd worked with Peter and Oliver, it opened a lot more doors for me. So I was able to turn up to publishers with stuff I'd had printed. I could show them the annuals, and I began to get more work. And this was a little book I did for Macmillan. And I'm showing it to you because it has a curious story attached to it, in the sense that if you make a mistake, that's not a good thing to do. Basically, this was a story about a little boy who goes to stay with his grandma in the country, and she has a cottage, and there it is on the front page. It was a picture book, more or less, with a little. And the cottage appears 2 or 3 times in the book. And I did all the artwork. I kept to the deadline. I sent everything off to the publisher. 3 weeks later, it all came back because the managing director had counted the tiles on the cottage roof, and they were not the same. And so I had to redo it. So that taught me a bit of a lesson. So you have to be, because he said any child would pick it up. Well, I'm not sure they would, but actually, you know, it was a very salutary lesson. So that's why that's in there. The previous 2 pictures were done in gouache, which doesn't print quite as well as this method, which is line and wash. And of course, I teach like line and wash. And a lot of my illustration work was done in using pen and ink and watercolor, because that reproduces well. So that's a story about a little girl and a rocking horse. And inside the book was, most of the illustrations were black and white, because when I started, printing was not quite as advanced as it is now, and so it's much cheaper to produce a book that had black and white illustrations in, especially for children who could just read. So it wasn't quite a picture book, but I've included this because when you're illustrating, you have to use reference, and the reference for this was my husband when younger. He doesn't quite look like that now, but so I was able to use him as a model. And this was had to be done in line, no color, no half tone. It had to be done in line. So he was the model for that. Also the model for this one. So you know, when you are drawing, you have to stylize, and this was a giant. And so I had him posed at the other end of the room, looking a little bit like that, but not quite. So he got used to being used as a model. It got absolutely worse and worse. This is a story about some mice and a giant and some treasure.
Linda,
yes.
Can I just put in, please? I've just had a phone call from one of our members to say that there's a lot of spurious noise in the background.
There is.
Yeah, so what I'm going, so
There is.
reluctantly, I thought people could be a little quiet, but obviously not. So reluctantly, I'm going to have to mute everybody.
Yeah. Probably better.
That one.
But better. Where is this? I can't find mute all now.
Can you all be like mice then?
Yes, that's where the noise is coming from. Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen. Could I ask everybody to mute themselves, please?
Okay.
Mute.
Okay,
Is
Linda,
that okay?
you're okay. Right, fine. Sorry about that.
Okay, no, that's all right. That's okay. So this all had to be done in black and white line, and had to fit the page with the text. So I would be given on my brief, say, 15 pages worth of illustration to split up through the book, and working in black and white line, I mean, many of you I know work in pen and ink. I couldn't use any form of halftones. So all my halftones and darks had to be done by cross hatching with ink. So you can see the cat in the picture and the background all done using hatching and cross hatching. And by golly, it digeristed. But it was an interesting way to work, and in many ways I enjoy the discipline of working in black and white because it really does make you as creative as you can be. So this is a cat confronting a little mouse. I put this in because if you look carefully, this is a double page spread, so the book is open and there are illustrations on both sides. If you look carefully, there's 2 mouse traps in that village street. Can you see them? And thereby hung a tale because we lived in a little village at the time in Kent, and there was a hardware store. And I don't like catching mice in traps. I think it's awful. But I needed a mouse trap because that was in the story, and I didn't know what they looked like. So I went along to the hardware store and said, "Could I borrow a mouse trap?" And she was very good, Mrs. Baird. She actually said, "Well, yeah, if you don't use it." And I said, no, I really just want to draw it. So they very kindly lent me a mouse trap, which actually never got used. So I just drew with it. So there it is in pen and ink. Sometimes I got some really, really interesting things, and this was a book about the life story of Pavlova, the ballet dancer, and that was great to do because the research I had to do, I had to find photographs of Anna Pavlova, and again it had to be done in black and white, so it was quite a challenge, but it's a very, very enjoyable book to do. You do get typecast, actually, a bit like actors, and I got known as the person who did, rather funny animals. This was a story about a little pig who ran away from the farm, and there he is staring in absolute horror at some pig's trotters in a butcher shop window. So he's not too happy about what he's seeing. This is a book which was extremely popular when it came out. A book by Dick King-Smith, who's sadly no longer with us, but a very fine author. And it's about a little hedgehog who gets hit on the head, so he can't pronounce his name properly, so he calls himself a hodgehog. That was the cover to the book, but inside are all these little hedgehogs. And when you're illustrating, you've got to research your subject, and there's no way I could lay hands on a hedgehog easily. I could have used photographs, but I wanted them in different positions, and I couldn't find the reference I wanted. So I went to my local museum, which had a whole sort of display of stuffed animals, and they very kindly took all these little stuffed hedgehogs out of the display, and I was able to draw them in different positions for a whole morning. But the poor little souls, they were just delightful, but they all had little spikes through their tummies that made them stand up. So they were useful to draw, but a bit grisly, really. So there they all are, again in pen and ink. And another double-page spread with them all sat by flower pots, which take an awful long time to do, because you can see where the hatching is involved. But it does build up into a tonal picture. This is one of my kind of absolute favourite books, because I'm a very much a cat person. This is the translation into French of a picture book I did for Collins, which was called When the People Are Away. And it's a story about what happens when people go away on holiday and leave their cats to be fed by a neighbour. And of course, every night these cats got up to no good of one sort or another. And I just really enjoyed doing this. It was a picture book in line and wash. And there's the cat streaming in for a party into the empty house, and these were the end papers, absolutely full of cats. I had a cat at the time called Pentecost, which is actually sitting almost just under halfway down. He's black and he's got his eye on you, and there he is. He became a film star, but I'll talk about that later. So those were the end papers, just inside the book. And I put this one in because there's a story that comes with this one. This is one of the double-page spreads from the book, where they're all going in for their party, and there's a man who's obviously just come back from the pub. Can you see him leaning on the fence there? And he's got a bottle in his hand. Now, when a publisher produces this, they want to, as much as possible, to sell the foreign rights to it. And you saw the cover of this book when it was translated to French. They sold it to the French. But they also sold this book to the Americans. And when they did, I was told by my editor that I would have to do this picture again, because the Americans had objected to having a drunk in the picture. So you can carry a gun in America and shoot people, but you mustn't show pictures of drunk people. So for £100, I had to redo it again without the man on the fence. Strange things happen when you sell to foreign places. So there they all are. And one night they had all in wrestling, and these are the cats on their way to the wrestling match. And it's just great fun, just finding the personalities in cats. So they're being very fierce. This is another illustration from the book, and I'm showing this because sometimes you can get stuck for a composition, and sometimes it's difficult to pull a picture together. And one of the it's not actually a trick, but it's a really interesting thing to do, is go to a famous painting and pinch its composition. And I did this for the cats. And I don't know if any of you can guess it, but as you're muted, you'll have to tell me afterwards, but I'm going to tell you now anyway. That's what I based it on, Les Parapluies. So the lady at the front becomes the cat having his tail wrung out by a kitten as he arrives for a musical evening. Right. This was one of a very successful run of books. I did 8 books about a little boy called Simon and his friend who was called the Witch. And Simon and the Witch went to 8 books. Jack and Nori did it as a story. If you're familiar with Jackanory, it was a program for children on BBC about sort of 4 o'clock, I suppose, where there was a narrator, and it was kind of illustrated as well. This character ended up on Jackanory, and they also dramatized it with a lovely actor called Elizabeth Spriggs, who played the witch. And there's another one of the books that all about her, and she's got a cat there called George, she never feeds, and he has to either eat furniture or telephone directories. But they nowhere in the book said what she looked like. Now, people kind of tend to think witches have got, pointy hats and look like witches. All it said in the book, in the description of her the author ever gave, was that she looked like a funny old lady. And so she does. And there she is. But she's got some slightly unusual things, like she's got skull hat pins, and round her neck was a dead chicken as a sort of feather tippet. You see the chicken's legs hanging down there. But I had to base her on something. And I actually based her on two people. One was my grandma, bless her, and the other one was a lovely old actress called Margaret Rutherford. And so she became this very slightly stout old lady, but with very curious clothes and a handbag, which she occasionally kept her cat in, or her magic wand. And there's her cat. This is a case of I don't know, nature imitating art, I think, really, because we had a cat called Pentecost who he was called Pentecost because he walked into church on Pentecost Sunday, and on Whit Sunday he was astray into the church where my husband was vicar in Kent, and we adopted him, and he was an extraordinary cat. But the curious thing was, I'd drawn this cat before he appeared, and he was a fluffy black cat who looked just like that as a stray when we adopted him and took him in. But he became a film star because when I was working for Jackanory, the producer had him stow away in his car when he was going back to London with the illustrations I'd done for it. And he said, would he come and sit with Nerys Hughes while she reads the stories on Jackanory? And he did, and he got paid for it. So there he is. There she is with him in a shopping basket. One of the things that you have to do, I'm just going to go back this one in a minute, is that when you're using black and white and you can't use colour, you've got to be as resourceful as you can. And if you look on his fur, I've used fingerprints to increase the sort of scruffy aspect of him. And using textural marks is very important to try and make the drawing as interesting as possible. There they all are. But unfortunately, as I said, you get typecast. So after that, I got some more witch books to do about different witches, not the same witch at all. So this is a more traditional one, a bit more glamorous, but she also has a cat. So there they are. That was a lovely book to illustrate. The book club decided to reissue the Wizard of Oz and asked me to do some sample illustrations, and I got chosen to illustrate it, and it was just great fun to do. But it had challenges. For a start, if you just go back to, I'll just go back to the cover. The little girl down there, I didn't really want her to look like Judy Garland because that wouldn't be quite right. That's, as a film, it's just as it is. So there was a little girl who lived in our village who was about the right age, and I asked her and her mum if she would come and pose for me. So these are the sort of preparatory drawings that have to be done to actually find the character of the person that you want to draw. As when you're drawing a character, you have to define it and do lots of preparatory work and drawings, so you get to know your character, and you can draw them in any situation, so they still look the same person. And there's the little girl who came and posed for me, who's now a mum of 2 children herself. So she's, yes, it's a long time ago. But there she is with her. I don't know if you remember the story of the Wizard of Oz, but this is the beginning of the book when her uncle's sitting on the doorstep and they're watching the storm come up in Kansas that takes her away to Oz, and they're looking a little worried. Now her uncle in there actually was her great uncle, and he is looking very worried. And the reason behind that is because I knew her great uncle. He lived in the same village, and I met his wife when one morning when I was working on the book, and I said, "Do you think John would come and pose for me, because I need someone to sit, that I can draw for this book?" Well, all she told him was, Linda wants you to come and pose for her. And he came and he sat there, and if you look, he doesn't look happy at all. I mean, he sat perfectly well for me, and I drew him and Rosemary. Afterwards, I discovered that he was terribly worried because he thought that I was going to ask him to take his clothes off. So that's why he looked so anxious, because his wife hadn't explained it properly to him. But they made 2 very good models. That was nice. And there's the Munchkins with the little dog Toto. Sometimes you get some really weird things to do. This is a skeleton's three-legged race, and unfortunately they've fallen to bits, or at least one of them has. So yeah, that was very curious, but great fun to do. This is a book about animals in a jungle, and there's 2 tigers having breakfast, and Mrs. Tiger's trying to attract Mr. Tiger's attention at the breakfast table. And there's all the little elephants that were in the book. I mean, I've just had a great time being an illustrator. It's just been such fun. It's really nice to be able to say you've had a job that you really enjoyed doing, and I have, and I did.
Mm.
But I also painted, and when we moved up north here, I took myself over to Appleby Horse Fair, and this is one of the paintings that I did from the fair.
Oh.
So it's a little bit blurry. That's my bad photography on this one.
Okay.
It was been great.
This is Appleby New Fair she's painted.
Yeah.
Yes, Appleby Horse Fair, where they go every year, except they couldn't do it last year, and I don't know if they'll do it this year. But there's lots to see there. And I sat drawing on the bank for a long time and developed these paintings from it.
Mm.
We were also in Antrim one year when Ballycastle had its horse fair, and this is the horse fair from Ballycastle that I based on drawings that I did there. These are oil paintings, by the way, quite big ones too. And then I began to move out of illustration. I suppose when I lost my agent, sadly she died, but I did start moving into painting tuition books for adults. So this comes from I think my book called Dynamic Watercolors. I've also had a strong interest in horses, and this is watercolor, and really is very much demonstrating how wet in wet works, and splashing flicks of color over the thing to increase, because when you're dealing with movement, particularly fast movement. You've got to somehow render that without actually outlining everything. So it's an exercise really in wet washes. I was lucky enough to teach a course in France, in Burgundy, a holiday course, and we went to a local market town. And these are all those lovely white cattle, all in a line, and they were just too good to miss. So I took some photographs and did a bit of drawing, but worked on oil painting from them. Lovely sort of French blokes at the background, with cigarettes hanging out and stuff. But I love these cows; they're beautiful. I also paint flowers, and these are. I put this in really because I had these flowers and wanted to paint them, but I often say to my students, try and see where you're painting, where your flowers are, if you've got them in a vase, where they look best. And in fact, if you put them on the floor, which is what I did, you get more of the flowers than you do of the vase, which is the main thing really, that you want the flowers. And so by putting them on the floor of my studio, it showed up the colour, I think, more effectively. So it's always worth looking to see where, if you're doing flowers, and particularly in pots, in vases, it's the flowers that are important. So try and put them on the floor. This was a study in an oil painting because I wanted to pick up the white of the flowers with the silver mug at the front. So it was an exercise really in painting quite pale colour and metal together. And that was an oil painting. These are some nasturtiums, which are just gorgeous, gorgeous colours to work with. This one I love particularly because it's my grandson's little pet lamb, little toy lamb, and I love wildflowers. And particularly things like dandelions and daisies, because they're just lovely things in their own right. Although my husband goes bananas when he sees them on the lawn, he's always picking out dandelions, much to my annoyance. But wildflowers also are sometimes the loveliest things. This is another oil painting. This little tiny oil watercolor of a study in using one color. So these are mauves and purples, and a ribbon to which is sometimes quite useful because you can use the ribbon as a lead in to the rest of the painting. It's a compositional device really. I love atmosphere. This is a painting from a place called Viera in North Holland, right up in Friesland. And it was a wonderful sort of April afternoon, foggy and cold, but just everything was almost one colour, but this very soft.
I think I'm mute.
Excuse me, Linda. Sorry again. Could I ask, please, if you haven't muted your device, would you please do it?
I'll have to switch off.
It's mute.
I don't know how to mute it.
So it should be.
How to mute.
Right. Yeah. So this is an oil painting that I did based on this waterside in North Netherlands. And this is Paris. We stayed in a hotel once in Paris, and when I looked out the window, all these people were going up and down the middle of the street where there's a sort of boulevard with grass and stuff, with their dogs, and they were just marching up and down with these dogs, and it was spring, so there's these lovely sort of thin trees with little bits of leaves coming out. So it's quite a delicate thing. It's an oil painting. And that, we went to Cornwall one year, and I mean, it's true what they say about the light in Cornwall. It's just stunning. This was Land's End, which I sat on the cliffs and painted in watercolour first and then did an oil from it. And this is the last house in County Durham. As you go up the hill through Weardale over towards Alston, that is the last house that you see. And when we moved up to the north of England, the space and the skies and the fells are just take your breath away, really. It's taken me a long time to get used to the landscape because it's bigger than me, but very, very, very beautiful. One of the things I'm interested in is contre-jour light, and this is seeing things against the light. And these were sheep in a field. This is an oil, and the light was just tipping the edges of their backs, and there's this lovely sort of bleached out yellow, really sort of cream colours coming through on the fields beyond them. This is a little gouache done on brown paper. If you're a watercolourist, it's worth having a look at different colours of paper to paint on. And this was a piece of stretched brown paper. I think it might actually have been wrapping paper, because I always like trying out new and different things, really. And I think it was wrapping paper, but it's a gouache of Clovelly, quite a small picture actually, but it was a nice little place to visit. I love snow, and this was the view from our window when we lived in Kent, of melting snow. And if you look carefully, there's two cats in the picture. I now always put two cats in my picture. One is in the foreground, one's up underneath the bush in the garden, as a sort of signature thing, really. So there's always two little cats somewhere, but there are actually two cats in the picture, and that was the star that ended up on TV is down in the foreground there, and the other cat's underneath the bush. And this is another snow picture from up here. This is just down the lane from where I live in the snow. I love the sweep of the road as it goes over the bridge, and the wonderful sort of trees covered in these beautiful colours of grey, blue greys and brown greys. Yeah, snow is one of my big things, really. And there it is again, as the later afternoon, the sun starts to go. These are oils, both of them. That's the view from my bedroom window when it snowed a couple of winters ago. And that's my neighbour's house across the green. And somebody's walking their dog. Well, no, I won't say what the dog's doing. But you'll see a little cat down in the foreground there. And that's an oil as well. This was a walk we did when it snowed a couple of years back. And all these sheep suddenly popped over their heads over the wall. I think they thought we'd come to feed them, but they were so funny, really, because they were obviously waiting and hoping that we might have brought a sack of food with us. That I did a painting from it, and there they all are, and that one's an oil as well. But light and oh, sorry, I've gone on too far. Let me take you back a bit. This is an oil of it was a garden actually in Durham. It's St John's College, where we stayed. I was staying. My husband was running a course, and I went into the garden and found this wonderful seat and this dappled light, which I just thought was just so beautiful. And with these white daisies, it was just waiting to be painted, really. And that's an oil as well. This is a pastel of Venice. We were lucky enough to be able to rent an apartment in Venice for a while. And this is a pastel of the Fondamenti. I like pastel, but I can't bear the feel of it on my fingers. It actually, I find it quite uncomfortable, really, but it produces such quick effects, and it's such a pleasure to work with as far as the colour goes, that I have to swallow my discomfort and just get on with it. And this is after a storm, and if you know Venice or been to Venice, it is liable to storms. And there'd been a cracker of a storm before this, but it had rained and rained, and this wonderful reflection of light everywhere in early evening with the lights in the distance was just waiting to be done, really. There's the usual one. It's a watercolour, this one, of St Mark's Square with the rain and a bit of flooding as well, I guess. It's back to the snow again. This is a field just down from where we live, with a moon in it, which again, it's back to my snow.
Oh, there.
And this one is the last one. This is quite a large watercolor, and it's of Christmas Eve in the village I live in. And it's got everything in there. It's got you'll see the pub in the middle of the picture with lots of people having a nice time there. But behind the pub, in the distance, is a nativity with an angel above it. And just down in the left-hand corner is Father Christmas, who's arrived with his little reindeer, just down on the left corner there. And just on the right there is a house, and that's our house. And I think there's a cat down there somewhere. Yes, there is. And just on the right-hand side of the picture is an angel appearing to the shepherds, and he's got his little 4x4 though, so it's a modern nativity. But I did this as a Christmas card, but it's actually quite a big watercolor painting. So I think, yes, that's it. Yes, that's it. That's the last one. So I don't know if you want to ask me things or what you do after these after these talks, but I'm here and available for a conversation if necessary.
Well, thank you very much for that, Linda. That was an excellent presentation, even given the technicalities of it. I think you did extremely well, given that I think it's probably the first one you've done. So if anybody has any questions, now you'll have to unmute yourselves. And Linda, if you could come out of your presentation.
Yeah, how do I do that, Ted?
Press escape.
Oh yes, okay. No.
Yeah, and again.
Yes. Again. He's not going anywhere, Ted.
No.
No.
You'll need to end the show, Linda.
End show. How do I do that?
Where you did share in the first place.
Yes, stop share.
Now a red one that says
Stop share.
Stop sharing. Yes, so press that.
Got it.
Oh, well done.
Oh, well done.
Hey, yeah. Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Very, very good.
Thank you. Can I say thank you to my
Really
lovely
good.
called Ted, because he's coached me through all this.
You did a great job, Ted.
Yeah, thank you, Ted.
Yes. So I'm open for questions if you need them.
Amanda, you need to unmute yourself.
I have unmuted, yes. Linda,
Yeah.
She looking straight at looking straight at you. Now, did you do a quick sketch there and then, or did you take photographs?
I do
Or have you
both.
just got a brilliant memory?
No. I mean, you do have to train your memory a little bit, but I took a photograph of the sheep. I did a very quick drawing in my sketchbook, but the thing is, particularly when you're working on animals, you know a little bit about the anatomy, because that helps you to understand what you're seeing. But mainly that actually came from a photograph. but with some colour notes and small bits of detail. But it was so cold, I couldn't draw for long. But if you understand a little bit about the animal's anatomy, that really does help.
Thank you.
Okay.
Linda,
Yeah.
when you do pen and wash, do you
Yes.
do the wash first or the pen or a bit of both?
Well, funny you should say that. I'm working on an article for Leisure Painter at the moment because
Oh, yes.
and it's about line and wash. And you can either do line and wash or you can do wash and line. It actually doesn't matter. But I think if you're a person who really enjoys drawing, then you'll probably want to draw first and add some colour. Whereas if you're a colourist, you might well want to add colour,
Yes.
and then go for a little bit of line to support it.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's Hobson's choice, really.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Please excuse me, I have to go. It's nice to see everyone. Bye.
Bye, Linda.
Thank you. Bye.
Lynn, I mean, Lynn.
Connection is unstable.
But I don't know how to do it.
It's just-
Oh, she's there.
It is way down. No reason why that should be so.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Yes, please, Ted.
Yeah.
Okay, Bran.
Well, not a
She's
question.
here.
But Linda, I had a network connection problem, so I could listen on Bell's phone, but I only got onto your presentation and able to see things at between 5 and 3:10. So when you repeat it, wherever you repeat it, can I be invited, please?
Yes,
But what
Could I also? Can you hear me, please,
Yeah.
Betty Gray?
Yes, Betty.
I haven't been able to see anyone or anything, and I do apologise because I think I'm the culprit with the noise behind. My husband's shredding wood in the garden. I'm terribly sorry. As I've been moving about, and I couldn't switch off, and I couldn't switch on, I couldn't do anything.
Don't worry.
But I could hear all that Linda said.
Well, I'm sorry you couldn't see it.
So sorry,
Okay, don't worry about it.
but I would hope to see it again.
All right, well, I'll put you on the list with Fran then.
Yes. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Can I just say, can you hear me? I'm not sure that I'm muted. No.
I
Can I
hear
say, first of all, thank you to Fran and for Ted for inviting me. I really enjoyed it. And thank you, Linda. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I wanted to give you a big clap, really. Thank you. I'm going to go now, but thanks very much.
Well, thanks very much, Lynn.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Lynn. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
I can go. I'm not sure that I can.
Any more questions, folks?
I'm very impressed with the range. I think it was wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely stunning. And your oil paintings were just stunning.
I enjoy that too.
I love the fact that there was so much character in it. It wasn't, they weren't all painted exactly the same. Everything had a character. The village had a character. The sheep had a character. Everything had a different character. And I loved that about your work.
Very much indeed. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you.
It's nice.
A lady of many talents, I think.
Yeah. Such a big range of pictures, and yeah, mind blowing.
Yes, it was lovely to see that you used all different mediums.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, I teach different media too, so
Yeah.
and it's nice to be an explorer.
Yeah.
And try different media too. So yeah.
Super.
Yeah.
Fabulous work.
Good.
I'm disappointed that you don't do more in pastel, because your pastel painting was really beautiful. So it's a shame that you don't like the feel of it.
Well, I have to get over that, but it's not my natural go-to medium. That's all I'll say, really. But yes, I mean, the effects that you get are so strong and vibrant that.
Have you tried wearing thin rubber gloves?
Yeah, don't like
that. Lynn, if you introduce Linda to your very expensive French pastels, she might overcome her resistance.
Which ones?
I don't know. That the price might
very
make her
expensive.
pass out.
Oh.
Well, I did a pastel course earlier in the summer at Higham Hall, and I ended up with bleeding fingers.
Yes.
And I was bleeding everywhere. And then they told me to go and get these little caps that you can get in Boots, Emily.
Were you working on a very rough paper?
Yes, it was sandpaper.
Yeah,
I didn't realise. And she said, "Oh, it's sandpaper," and I ended up with blood everywhere.
Know that you can use pipe insulation. You can cut pieces of pipe insulation into very small bits, and then you can just blend with that. Your fingers must have been agony.
They were.
Suffering for your art.
Oh dear.
Good. Well, you've been a jolly good audience.
Well, it was lovely. It was really lovely.
Great idea. Thanks for inviting us.
Yes,
thank you.
Linda, and thank you, Ted.
Yes.
Yes, and Fran, where was she?
And Peter, who
Oh yes, yeah.
Yes, Peter came in on my first rehearsal, I think.
Yeah.
Well, very grateful. It's been lovely.
Lovely. Good. Well, I'll see you again sometime, no doubt.
That's Betty.
Well, I think
I don't know whether Linda.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you realise it, but actually on the screen you've got quite a few of your pupils in your Higham Hall art class.
Oh.
One of whom.
Oh, yes.
And thank you very much for doing it. My still life is upstairs waiting to be finished.
Is it really? Oh, right. Right. Yeah, I'm doing a course at Higham next month with my husband. We do a painting retreat, which is quite interesting. So it's linking up things that he does about painting and theology and stuff like that, but with what I'm doing. So,
Good.
Yeah, interesting. No doubt I'll see some of you at Higham.
Which was the village, may I ask you, diverting off slightly, in Kent? I just wondered which was your village in Kent.
A place called Elam, near Canterbury.
Ah.
Lovely.
No, my cousin had 5 parishes near Bredgar.
At where?
Bredgar, Frinstead. There was a group of parishes there.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, this was one of a group of 3. It's now 8, I think. Yeah, a bit more than that.
Hello, dear. Hello.
Okay, folks.
These cats joined in.
I think it's an appropriate time now for us to bring the meeting to a conclusion.
Yeah.
Given the fact that it's if not the first time, one of the first times that we've tried anything like this, and certainly it's a new medium for Linda too. And I thought she did extremely well.
Yes.
Oh, yes. So give her a round of applause.
Thank you, everybody.
And Linda, I'll be in touch with you by email.
Okay, Ted, and thanks again.
And if ever you put another presentation together, we'd be really interested to have a look at it.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So with that, folks, we'll close down for the afternoon.
Okay.
See you in a fortnight's time.
Bye.
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 Bye.